Major D.I. Bamidele, Wing Commander Ben Ekele, Wing Commander A.C. Sakaba, Lieutenant Colonel M.F. Young, Commander A.A. of Wiji, Squadron Leader A. Ahura, Major D.E. West, and Major T.J. Akwachiki are guilty and are hereby convicted of the offense of conspiracy to commit treason contrary to and punishable under Section 37, Subsection 2 of the Criminal Code.
In December of 1985, rumors of a coup plot against General Babangida's regime began to spread through the ranks of the Nigerian military. Shortly thereafter, the plot was leaked. What followed was a wave of arrest, secret trial and execution of Mamman Vatsa, Michael Yoshi, Bamidele Idowu, and others. So, how did the conspiracy leak? In this video, I bring to you the untold story of how the Mamman Vatsa conspiracy leaked in 1985. I will examine 3 possible scenarios. We have a lot to talk about today, so let's dive into the details. My name is Gabriel Adidia. One of the most difficult aspects of investigating the Vatsa Coup Plan of 1985 was discovering exactly how the coup leaked. Despite the fact that the army was already saturated with mutual suspicion following the Babangida's coup against Buhari, historians are confident that the coup originally leaked from the Air Force. Right from the start of Babangida's regime in August 1985, various groups and cliques are formed in the military, and the intelligence agencies have often been fed with allegations of coup plotting. To forestall the unfortunate incident that later happened anyways, the governor of Benue State was quoted as telling officers from his state to be wary of being exploited by the Hausa Fulani, unquote, to stage a counter-coup against Babangida on behalf of Buhari. The suspicion was so deep that officers going about their lawful duties were being monitored by others, were themselves being monitored by others. First, it was rumored that the artillery and the engineering unit were plotting the coup and was followed closely by the Air Force. Curiously, frivolous attempts were made to frame officers seen in unusual places. For instance, police officer Mohammed Gambo, for example, told Wing Commander B.E.N. Ekele that he saw him with Iyoshi in Benin. However, Ekele claims he was there on the weekend of December 7 or 8 with a civilian acquaintance, Mr. Otutu, to inspect a chicken farm that he intended to invest in. Another interesting twist to this claim is that Iyoshi never traveled to Benin. Even harmless situations where officers closed from work late were reported as suspicious. But here is what most people do not know about this conspiracy. A precise sequence of events led to the massive arrest of December 17 or 18 to 28, 1985 and the subsequent days. So, here is the real story of the events that unfolded. Shortly after the Iyoshi, Oche, Bitiyong, Ekele, Sakaba and Bamidele group meeting in Makurdi on November 30, 1985, Major Agboho of Army Intelligence was briefed on a rumor concerning a possible coup at the Makurdi Air Force Base. He asked his acquaintance in Lagos, Major Jonathan Indaya-Garba of the Corps of Supply and Transport, to provide him with any contact that would assist with investigation. Indaya-Garba is a chief officer also from Benue State. Accordingly, Garba provided the name of Flight Lieutenant Asu. But Asu died unfortunately in an aircraft before the tribunal began. On December 12, 1985, Major Agboho went to Makurdi to follow through with the investigation. In Lagos, on December 14, prompted by information from Major Agboho of intelligence about a possible coup plot by NAV officers in Makurdi, Major Indaya-Garba decided to check on his friend, Squadron Leader Ahura of the Presidential Air Fleet at the NAV base in Ikeja. His mission was to ascertain if he had heard any coup rumors. In a casual but costly conversation, Ahura asked Garba if he had heard of any plan by some individuals to destabilize the regime. Apparently, such news of an army coup was already circulating in the Air Force officers' base at Ikeja. But Indaya-Garba replied in the negative. He placed the blame squarely on the Air Force as being responsible for the rumored coup. In the meantime, Ahura unaware that Ahura-Garba was in contact with military intelligence, went on to disclose, rather unnecessarily, that Lieutenant Colonel Oche was unhappy with the way people from Benue State were treated and had demanded to visit him whenever he was in Lagos. In the same breath, Ahura told Garba that he had recently visited Port Harcourt via Makurdi and met with Colonel Victor Malu. Malu is also from Benue State. Ahura added that when he saw Oche on December 9, he was speaking in a shaky voice and claimed that people were jittery with him in the office. Later in this video, you will see why people were jittery with him at work. And a moment before we continue, I invite you to like this video and subscribe to Hispu Media if you have not done so already. Subscription is free, but will go a long way to help us create more videos. And before we return to the story, let me give a special shout out to our channel members. Your support is invaluable and highly appreciated. So let's get back to the story. Immediately he left Ahura, Ahura-Garba reported this conversation to his commander at Supply and Transport Corps, Colonel Ikia. Ikia was also from Tiv and coincidentally a distant uncle of Iyoshi. Ikia had sent Garba to Port Harcourt to cross-check with Colonel Victor Malu if Ahura met him in Port Harcourt recently and whether there was any undercurrent of dissatisfaction from Tiv and other Benue officers. Even though Malu already heard stories about the rumors, he advised Ahura-Garba that Tiv officers should remain loyal to the government. He echoed the same position he had already expressed to Squadron Leader Ahura on December 6 while driving from Port Harcourt to Boku. During the trial, the prosecution claimed that Ahura may have gone to the Port Harcourt trip without a pass, possibly to investigate the Malu, Abubakar and Sakaba fake group on Oche's behalf. But this angle was strongly denied. Meanwhile, on December 16, Ahura met with Oche in Lagos as requested, and Oche continued to ramble on incoherently about the treatment of Benue officers and repeated the claim that people were afraid of him at work. When Ahura was about to leave, Oche instructed him to contact Squadron Leader Martin Luther, also of the Presidential Fleet, about some spare parts he asked him to buy for him. Meanwhile, Ikia was in contact with Colonel Halilu Akiru of the Directorate of Military Intelligence, DMI. Ahura-Garba also learned from Ahura that a coup was planned for February 1986 when both Babangida and Abacha were expected to be out of the country. On the evening of December 17, 1985, Ahura paid another visit to Garba and discussed rumors of a coup. Here, he described Oche's action on December 16 in detail. During their conversation, a speculative rumor emerged that the coup planners were in two groups and that if Group 1 failed, Group 2 would take over by default. Squadron leader Bodokiri was detailed in their plot to take over the NAV base in Lagos. After all was gathered, Garba immediately reported to Colonel Ikia and Major Agboho of Intelligence, who had just returned from Makurdi. Then, Agboho reported directly to the Director of Military Intelligence, Colonel Haliru Akilu, who then called Garba and asked him to put his statement on paper. Subsequently, in separate calls, Colonel Ikia and Akilu informed the Army Chief, Major General Sani Abacha, of their findings. But as we will see shortly, it appears Abacha was already informed by Lieutenant Al Mustapha. Thereafter, Abacha sought Babangida's approval to begin massive arrest. A little under 300 officers and men were rounded up. Lieutenant Colonel Oche was one of the first to be arrested, followed by a number of Air Force officers, including the two in Makurdi, Sakaba and Ekele. They were arrested from their homes at around 3 a.m. Almost everyone who belonged to a group of officers under surveillance at the time was arrested. On December 28, as Ahura was about to fly the Chief of General Staff, Obitu Ikiwe, to Ilorin for an engagement, he was arrested by NAV intelligence and transported to Ikoyi prison. Analysts have claimed that the so-called coup described by Ahura while he was discussing with Ahura-Garba was not the coup of Iyoshi and his group. Their reason is that following the Makurdi meeting on November 30th, Iyoshi never met Ekele, Sakaba, or any other Air Force commander until he was arrested. They were waiting for details on the so-called Port Harcourt group, which Sakaba has set up as a decoy. In fact, Iyoshi, along with the Makurdi and Kaduna subgroups, were taken aback by the reported February 1986 aspect of the operation, which they learned about while in custody. However, since Iyoshi and his group had already held a physical meeting, their own plot became the focal point. Every other false lead collapsed on its weight. Of course, the Sakaba decoy became clear, but since no one else was executed for coup plotting, Ahura must have been referring to either a non-existent plot or another plot within the plot, possibly by the Lagos subgroup, which subsequently implicated Squadron Leader Ahura himself, Squadron Leader Martin Luther, and Squadron Leader Ode. Although Iyoshi was the one who first introduced Martin Luther to Oche, he never met Ahura or Ode in person during that time period. However, Martin Luther did not attend the Makurdi meeting on November 30th due to a warning from Wing Commander Oku and old schoolmates from St. Gregory's College in Lagos. The only conversation that Iyoshi ever had with Oche regarding Ahura was a passing reference by Oche that Ahura was upset about a coup that removed Buhari from power. Iyoshi never met Ode either, though they knew each other from their school days. As a result, it can be concluded that it was Oche's unguarded remarks about the treatment of Benue officers and Ahura's speculation about a rumored coup in February that set up the events that followed. None of these had anything to do with Mike Iyoshi, Bamidele, Ekele, Sakaba, although there was already a leak in Makurdi about something going on. During the trial, Iyoshi concluded in court that there may have been a different plan and process other than his own. He believes that he had been exploited and even asked to be in charge of operations while a completely different scenario was unfolding in Lagos. He considered this as a plot within a plot. It is not clear, however, if the military intelligence boys were behind this confusion. In the end, the government bundled rumors and facts together and executed Mamman Vatsa and others for conspiracy. The procedure of investigation and interrogation was very craftily designed. After being arrested, Iyoshi and Luther, for example, were separated from others and their statements were used to cross-check others. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Colonel Bitiyong, who in early December was able to independently establish that Lieutenant Colonel Oche was being monitored, was equally being monitored as well. Even though he was not arrested along with Oche and some others, he was being closely monitored and specific attention was paid to his visit to General Vatsa's house after Oche was arrested. Mamman Vatsa was not arrested until December 23, 1985. In a written statement, Oche initially identified himself as a member of the Iyoshi group, which according to him was formed to prevent unpatriotic army officers from striking. Although he had also expressed anti-government views in the past, he later recanted them. Oche subsequently claimed that he was simply carrying out his legitimate duties as an intelligence officer by planting himself on Iyoshi and Bitiyong in order to get at Mamman Vatsa. He went on to reveal, shockingly, that he was asked by Colonel Haliru Akiru, the DMI, to secretly track Mamman Vatsa right from the inception of the IBB regime. However, with no evidence that Oche had ever made any formal report to the DMI on his investigation of Vatsa, the tribunal refused to believe him. Until his execution on the 5th of March 1986, Oche was convinced that Akilu had acted to protect another group while setting his own group up for the fall. But here is another twist to this whole leak. In 1985, Lieutenant Patrick Odoba was a 25-year-old young infantry officer at the Brigade of Guards garrison. However, Odoba had witnessed the two previous coups against Shagari and Buhari as a duty officer at the radio station in Ikori, and Christian Oche was his uncle. He had been commissioned into the army in June 1983. On December 6, 1985, Lieutenant Colonel Oche told Odoba in confidence in Lagos about a planned coup against Major General Ibrahim Babangida. He said Babangida would be arrested in the coup, but provided no further details. All he said was that Odoba would hear more from him soon. But of course, that did not happen by the time arrest began. With this information, Lieutenant Odoba was in a difficult position. Quite apart from the crisis of confidence resulting from the relationship between Oche and Odoba, he was afraid to report to his garrison commander or brigade commander for fear that they may well be in the plot based on his experience of coups in the brigade. Notwithstanding, on December 7, 1985, Odoba decided instead to tell his friend Lieutenant Al Mustapha. Yes, the Al Mustapha you know. At that time, Lieutenant Al Mustapha was a security officer to Major General Sani Abacha, the then Chief of Army Staff. Odoba reasoned that Mustapha would tell the Chief of Army Staff directly and quite possibly the Director of Military Intelligence, since Mustapha was an intelligence officer. On December 13, Odoba says Mustapha confirmed that he had already reported the matter to the Director of Military Intelligence. When Odoba suggested at that point that he would tell his commander, Mustapha discouraged him from doing so. You may recall that Oche had told Ahura on December 9 that he noticed he was being treated with suspicion in the office. So, it is acceptable to presume that in addition to the leak at Makurdi, the Directorate of Military Intelligence had a cross-leak in Lagos from Odoba through Al Mustapha before the final nail from Major Garba. But that is not all. There is another piece of evidence supporting the cross-leak. In trying to cross-check the Sakaba decoy and perhaps craftily set up the potential competing group, Lieutenant Colonel Bitiyong contacted his friend, the commander, Brigade of Guards, Lieutenant Colonel Joshua-Madaiki, at the end of the first week of December to find out if he knew anything about some officers planning a coup. Somewhat hesitantly, Madaiki told Bitiyong that the government was already aware, although he did not reveal which group the government was aware of. It turns out that Odoba has asked Mustapha to follow him to Oche's house on or about December 9 or 10 to know where the house was located. According to him, Al Mustapha asked him to show him the location of the house, and Odoba wanted to also create an opportunity for Mustapha to hear Oche with his own ears. This was certainly an audacious assumption that Oche was stupid enough to discuss such matters with Mustapha. They briefly met Oche as he returned from games that evening. Nothing was discussed, but Oche queried Odoba for bringing Al Mustapha to his house. Finally, when Oche was arrested, Odoba was also arrested and charged with concealment of treason. After the investigation and trial that followed, Mamman Vatsa, Ahura, Oche, Eyoshi, Bitiyong, Bamidele, and 4 others were convicted and executed by firing squad on the 5th of March 1986. We have covered the story of Bamidele Idowu and Michael Eyoshi in the separate videos displayed here. Please check any of them out if you can. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Hispo Media, and also share with your friends and family. And I will see you in the next one. Thank you very much for watching.